Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Dr. Barry Reiman is the VP of Business Development for Recovery Unplugged Treatment Center. He's also been featured guest on such daytime television shows as Dr. Phil, The Doctors, and Face the Truth with Vivica A. Fox. Working in the field of addiction treatment for close to 2 decades, Dr. Barry has developed an acute understanding and passion for treating those struggling with substance use disorders. Dr. Barry's career in the treatment field stems from his personal connection to addiction. Dr. Barry has been in recovery since June of 1996 and has dedicated his personal and professional life to facilitating change in the lives of those looking for a way out of their addiction. His passion and thirst for knowledge has led him to becoming one of the treatment industry's leading influencers. I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
That's a really good question. I'm posed that a lot because in my estimation, right, and you probably know from choosing the path you've chosen, which is, a helping profession, and I can't speak for you, but the majority of people, I think, who get into psychology may or may not have had some type of issue themselves. Serious, non-serious, maybe you sought help, maybe you felt better from seeking help and decided that was going to be your path. My story has a few prongs. I am in recovery. I'm in long-term recovery. I got sober on June 19th, 1996. So it's been almost 26 and a half years that I've been doing this. But I didn't choose this life. It kind of chose me. And what I mean by that is if you hear it said a lot when you're trying to, quote unquote, convince somebody through an intervention to get better. And you often hear that you really have to want this to get it. And that wasn't my story. I didn't wake up on June 19th, 1996 and say, today is going to be the day that I would love to give up the love of my life, which was a substance. I was intervened on. I was seeing this guy, okay? His name was Dr. Rick Harris. And I bring up his name because he plays a vital role in my story. I was 20 years old, 2 months shy of my 21st birthday when I got sober. But it wasn't my first attempt to change my ways. At 19 years old, I was put into an intensive outpatient program, and I just wanted no part of it at all. I used the entire time. I was faking my drug tests, my drug screens. My parents had me start seeing this Dr. Rick, and I would see him weekly, and I thought I was pulling the covers over his head. And fast forward, things got real out of control for me. I'm 6'3" tall. I was 140 pounds soaking wet, having grand mal seizures in and out of hospitals. And I did not even want to stop at that point. I had a girlfriend at the time who had been away for a couple months studying abroad. And she came back and saw what I looked like and heard stories from my roommates of what I had been doing. And she contacted my sister. Now, I had an appointment on Wednesday, June 19th, 1996 with Dr. Harris. And when I showed up to my appointment, my mother, my father, and my sister were all sitting in the waiting room. And I said, the gig's up. And I got brought in there and they did their whole intervention shtick. And I just knew, at that moment, I really didn't have much of a choice, right? I was not a fully self-supporting adult, with a career and with many options. So I made a deal. I was going to go into treatment and I was going to give this thing 90 days and not necessarily 90 days of treatment, but I was going to give the whole not using 90 days. And on the 91st day, I could reevaluate. And if I didn't look better, if I didn't feel better, if my relationships hadn't improved, I could always go back out. drugs and alcohol would always be there. We were not going to go through prohibition again. And I say this using the key word, I did not want to stop. And there's a belief out there, and it's still prevalent, that people think you have to want to stop to stop. And sometimes you can desire less consequences as a motivator for change. And that was my story. And I went into detox, I went into treatment. I don't know, after about 30 days or so, I got out and I started attending some outpatient groups, and I started attending these NA and AA classes, which I thought was a cult. But I was stubborn, and I said, I'm going to make it to that 90-day mark. And I can't tell you, Doc, what day it was in those 90 days, but there was a day where I found myself not thinking about using, and it was already like 4 hours into the day. There were days in a row where I legitimately started to feel better. And by the time I made it to that 90-day mark, I looked better, I felt better, my relationships had improved. And like a good addict, my brain said, wow, if I feel this good at 90 days, I wonder how I'll feel at 6 months. So recovery got me before I got it. And I continued on my journey, and I saw Dr. Harris probably for the first 2 years or so that I was in recovery. It was weekly, and then it was every other week, right? And we would just have and it's amazing what therapy can do when you're not going to a session high. It's amazing what therapy can do when you're open to change and when you have the ability to get vulnerable. It is next to impossible to do therapy with a person who is consistently under the influence. I equate it to a swimming pool, okay? And I live in Florida, so we have a lot of underground pools, right? In the ground pools, not underground. And in the 80s and 70s, they used to use this stuff called Marcite to line the pool before they put water in it. And what happened with Marcite is over the years, it would start to get scaly to the consistency of like a sidewalk. And when you're a kid and you're diving in the pool and your knee hits the ground, you were coming up bloody. So they invented something called Diamond Bright. And Diamond Bright has promised to stay smooth for the life of the pool, right? So let's say you have that old pool and you want to replace the Marcite with Diamond Bright. What's the first thing you have to do?
Take the Marcite off.
Okay, how do you get to the Marcite? What's the first thing you have to do?
Pool.
Swimming pool. Drain it, right? And once we drain the pool, only then can we get to what lies underneath, right? And the substance, whether it's alcohol or other substances, is that water in the swimming pool. So when you're coming to therapy, you're treating the symptoms and not the underlying issue if somebody's under the influence. And so I made these amazing discoveries in therapy. I went back to school and finished up my undergrad degree. I remember contemplating going into the field of psychology. And again, I didn't want to be a psychologist. Like that wasn't my aspiration when I was 5 or 6 years old. I think I wanted to be a marine biologist. And then somewhere in my active addiction, when I left the University of Florida in Gainesville after 2 years and came home because of my addiction, I enrolled at FIU in Miami, and I was in architecture. Like I had no clue what I wanted to do. But it was attending these NA meetings, it was attending therapy, it was reaching my hand out and helping others that filled me with joy, that propelled me on the plane of getting myself into a helping profession. I remember right at about the 2-year mark, I was wrapping up with Dr. Harris, and on my last session with him, I happened to be his last session of the day as well, right? So this was my very last session with Dr. Harris from the age of 19 to 22 when I saw him. And I'm contemplating at this point grad school. I'm still finishing up undergrad, and I'm contemplating grad school, but no solid plans. And I, expressed to him that maybe I wanted to get into something like this. And long story short, we're leaving his office that day. And he took me out of the employee exit because he had a lockup. I was his last session of the day. And he had those wooden mailboxes, those inner office mailboxes that have all the slots with the people's names on the bottom. And I looked at that and I said, wow, Dr. Harris, I didn't realize you have so many psychologists working for you. He's like, yeah, maybe your name will be up there one day. And I was like, whatever. I didn't think anything of it, but I remember him saying that. So fast forward, I finish undergrad and I apply to graduate school. I get into a doctorate program. I go through, I do all my coursework, 4 years of coursework, and now it's time to apply for doctoral internships. So I apply in Chicago at Joliet, at the prison. I applied in Dixon, Illinois, at the prison there. I did forensic psychology. And then I applied in DC at some type, I don't remember exactly. And then I said, you know what, let me apply somewhere locally here in South Florida. And I apply at Nova Southeastern University. They had a consortium, which was like 4 different sites in one. And then I'm sure you're familiar with the internship process. You go on these interviews and then you create your preferred destinations, and they have a matching program, and wherever you match, you match. So I fly to Illinois, I fly to DC, I fly to California, I think. And then I walk into Nova Southeastern University and I get into that room and I open the door and Dr. Harris is sitting in there. I hadn't seen him in like 4 years. And he goes, Barry? And I said, Dr. Harris? So he recused himself from the interview, of course. And long story short, I wind up matching at Nova for my doctoral internship. And I do my year-long doctoral internship, and it comes time to do my residency. And guess where I do my residency?
Same place?
Dr. Harris's private practice.
Wow.
And my name made it up on the mailbox.
Excellent.
And through that entire story, I had to do a dissertation, and my dissertation was a program design. And I had taken my passion, which is addiction treatment, and I created an intensive outpatient program utilizing evidence-based methodologies, so neurobiofeedback and interactive journaling. And my chairperson was Dr. Harris. Usually when somebody does a dissertation, if they're doing a program design, you fulfill the requirements and the book sits on the shelf. And we decided to take my dissertation and actually open a program that was created by myself. And we named it the Center for Proven Recovery, or CPR, because it was using evidence-based methodologies, which wasn't prevalent in the treatment of addiction and mental health. Okay. There was a lot of treatment centers opening around this time, but it was by people who had 3 or 6 months sober, whose parents had a lot of money, and all it was 12 steps, right? There was no actual treatment. And Dr. Harris and I wound up becoming 50-50 partners in the venture, which got me into, or made the introduction for me into the business side of addiction treatment. So I was still running the groups and doing the therapy, but I was learning the business side of addiction treatment. And fast forward, that program had success for about 3 years until Dr. Harris, myself, and another person opened a 27-bed residential treatment center. And so in the interim between, my residency and by the time this program opened, I worked in his private practice seeing patients every day. So my story is a little unique because although I'm a doctor of psychology, I don't really practice anymore. I'm pretty much now fully immersed on the business side of addiction treatment. That doesn't mean I don't use my skills. It doesn't mean I don't do interventions anymore. It doesn't mean that every once in a while I won't run a group. I'm just not on the clinical team. And I had to make that decision because I'm a big people person. And I felt like, and again, this is just my story, but I felt like I could be helping more people than sitting one session at a time for 45 to 50 minutes, back to back to back to back to back. I felt that I had a message to get out there be it in front of a group or an audience or an employer group or, at a conference, right? I mean,
The Integrative Mental Health Summit, correct?
right.
We just had
You
that.
met me because I was speaking at the conference, right?
Right.
So, and I fell in love with business development. I fell in love with convincing clients to come into treatment, because I know from my own personal story, I don't care if you want to get better. I didn't want to get better. And here I am, more than half of my life later, still in recovery. Right. So I've now, I've been in the addiction treatment industry for the better part of 15 years. And it's really just been a passion. I don't really get burnt out. I'm in love with the program we have today, which is, we can get into. It's a really unique treatment facility that's all based in music. And it's not hokey. It's not just you come in, play the guitar and get better. It's very clinically oriented, but it's music immersive, which makes it a very engaging experience for any client that comes through our door. So that was basically my story into how I got involved in this profession and what the evolution has looked like since entering the field.
So is that 27-bed facility that you opened the one that you're still working with now?
No. So we opened that in 2013. We actually grew that program from one facility in 27 beds to 5 facilities and 450 beds. In 2016, we attempted to sell around the same time. It's a very sad story. I'll just condense it. We closed in early 2018. Couldn't sustain, grew too big, payroll was too large. All of the major insurers, there was a lot of fraud going on in South Florida at the time, and the insurance companies couldn't tell the good operators from the bad, so they blanketly audited all of the facilities in South Florida. Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross, United Healthcare, Humana, all of the larger insurance companies. And instead of getting paid in 20 to 30 days, it was now taking 6 to 9 months. And unfortunately, we just couldn't sustain. And, our biggest mistake was we did not diversify out of this market in South Florida. Whereas Recovery Unplugged, who I've been with now for 5 years, who opened 2 months before my other facility did, which was a competitor of mine, they were able to sustain that time because their second facility they opened was in Austin, Texas, and not in South Florida, right? So they had the support, financial support of what that program was bringing in to keep them afloat here in Florida, where all 5 of our facilities were within a 50-mile radius of each other. So now Dr. Harris is still at his private practice. He's also running a small ED, IOP, an eating disorder intensive outpatient program. And, we chat every now and again.
How long have you been with the Recovery Unplugged?
5 years.
And that's a residential program?
So Recovery Unplugged is all levels of care, starting with medical detox. Then we have true residential. We have PHP, better known as partial hospitalization. And then we have IOP, or intensive outpatient. We're headquartered here in South Florida. We have 2 programs in South Florida. Our headquarters is in Fort Lauderdale, which is also the site of our lower levels of care, our PHP and our IOP program.
So for those who are unaware, what's the difference between partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient?
Okay, so let's start actually at the top, right? Medical detox. If somebody is drinking daily or somebody is taking benzos daily, whether it's Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, and they were to stop cold turkey, they can literally die from those 2 substances, alcohol or benzos. Opiates, heroin, oxys, roxys, Percocets, you could be using those daily. And if you stop cold turkey, you're going to get very, very sick, but it's not lethal, right? So there's 2 main substances that require a medical detox, alcohol and benzos. And when somebody comes into detox, they are given what's called a taper. So if someone's coming in because they've been drinking every day and can't stop on their own, to avoid withdrawal symptoms, whether it's going to be a seizure, delirium, tremors, we will give them, let's say, Librium. And they start out at a certain dose, and then the next day that dose gets lowered a little bit more, and then on the third day it gets lowered a little bit more. Typically, detox is about 7 days. And it's just a safe way to come off of a substance that can be lethal if you go cold turkey. You're monitored 24/7 by nursing. Your vitals are taken every 15 minutes. We keep our clients comfortable. And then a client will drop down to what's called true residential. And there's a common misconception between residential and PHP. True residential means you're eating, sleeping, and having treatment all under the same roof or on the same campus, right? There's also 24-hour nursing that's available for residential clients. You have to meet certain ASAM criteria to meet per insurance companies for residential. Typical length of stay, insurance-based, is usually 10 to 14 days in true res. And then once the care manager at the insurance company feels that their client is stable enough to step down, they will step down to what's called PHP, or partial hospitalization. At that point, clients are in groups, and it varies. With us, it's 6 days a week. So they come to our clinical building in the mornings from 9 a.m. until about 3:30 in the afternoon, at which time we have vans that will take them to our residence that we have 5 minutes away from our center. We still have what's called BHTs, or behavioral health techs, that monitor the clients. Clients can have their cell phones at that level of care. It's essentially a level of outpatient, but it's a very structured outpatient level.
So when you say that the buses take them someplace, they're taking them to like a halfway house, a residential?
We have our own PHP housing. In Florida, it's on the beach.
So these people are not going home to their own residences?
No, unless they're local, they can commute from home if they are local.
Okay.
Right? Or they have a place to go. They don't have.
But the partial means that they're in your building from like 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, involved
Correct.
in this intensive treatment process.
Correct. And then in the evenings, we'll take them to 12-step meetings. We'll take them to the gym. We take them grocery shopping so they can fill the fridges in their apartments. They cook for themselves. It's having somebody adjust from the highest level of care. We don't just push them out into the world.
Right.
Right. So once somebody has been in PHP for 2 to 3 weeks, they will then step down to IOP, or intensive outpatient. At that level of care, we have 5-day-a-week IOP or 3-day-a-week IOP, but the groups are run for 3 hours at a time, typically in the evenings. So at this point, they could be working and coming to groups, attending in the evenings. They still get an individual therapy session every week. So treatment itself, just like detox, is like a slow taper back into the world. It's done in stages, and it's done like that on purpose, right? Because most people who are coming into treatment or needing treatment, their coping skills are in the toilet, right? I mean, think about what their coping skills has been to self-medicate. So, everyday stressors that normies deal with, that have been living life on life's terms for a long time without abusing substances, can seem monumental for somebody who's just coming back into the world.
Exactly.
Right. So we do our best to titrate them through the levels, which in turn helps them adjust. It's not the story with everybody. There are some people that are just too freaking busy and they just need to be detoxed and they want to go back home. We are offering something now that is really cool. It's a virtual component. So we have a virtual intensive outpatient program that we're now running in the 4 states that we have facilities in. All of our in-person places are for substance use disorder. So it's primary substance use, as opposed to some facilities that are primary mental health, right? Our virtual program, we have a few different tracks. We have primary substance use. We have a faith-based substance use track. We have a DBT track. And now we have a primary mental health virtual IOP, which you don't have to have any history or ever have been on a substance. You can be dealing with depression, anxiety, mood disorder, personality disorder, trauma. You will have to meet criteria for intensive outpatient, meaning if we have somebody that calls us up that's actively psychotic or delusional, they're going to need a higher level of care, which we can't provide. Right. But if they're stabilized on their medications, on their antipsychotics, and or just your average everyday person that's just looking for a little bit more support, right? That's going to give you a little bit more than just a, one-on-one hourly session once a week with a clinician, right? So this is 3 hours, 3 times a week virtually. But it gives that person who it's become really popular with employers who are into wellness, right? Wellness is a big topic now. But the employers hate to lose their employees for 30 days at a time, have someone go out on FMLA. So this is a way to offer more support for somebody that really just can't pick up and leave their life for 30 days. And they can do it from the comfort of their own home. Our facilities are here in Florida. We're also in Austin, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, and we are 5 miles outside of DC in Northern Virginia, a little town called Annandale. So those are all of our locations across the country.
So now all of these different levels of care you're talking about, are all of them integrating the music component?
Yes. One of the partners at our facility was a touring member with the band Aerosmith. His name's Richie Supa. And Richie actually works out of our Fort Lauderdale facility. He runs 2 groups a week for the clients. All of our facilities have live sound stages and recording studios. But here's the kicker, Doc. Only about 10% of our clients are actually musically inclined. That's it. 90% can't hold a tune or strum a guitar. But 100% of the clients who come to us all have a love for music. Now, I didn't say they all have a love for opera or they all have a love for country music. They all have a love for music. I don't know, and to this day, I have not met somebody yet that doesn't at least like music in one form or another. And so what we found is music is a mood changer. There is no doubt about it. And music actually affects the same areas of the brain that drugs and alcohol do. And we talk about things like echoic memory. And I'm sure you as a psychologist know what echoic memory is, but for the listeners, echoic memory means, and it can happen through a wide variety of our senses, namely smell and sound, right? And you can walk in somewhere and it smells like something, and right away you're like, oh my God, that reminds me of my grandma's house.
Exactly.
Right? Now, somewhere in your brain stored up there, you had that distinct smell of your grandma's house. Or a song comes on and you're like, oh my God, 7th grade roller skating at Galaxy Skateway. Look out weekends, 'cause here I come, right? So
Yep.
What we found was, if we know that music is associated with mood, and we know how heavily these memories are tied together, we could do a lot of good work in the treatment of addiction and mental health utilizing music. That doesn't mean that we don't do cognitive behavioral therapy. It doesn't mean that we don't do dialectical and behavioral therapy. It doesn't mean that we don't have clinicians who are trained in EMDR, because we do. All of our clinicians are all licensed master's level clinicians, well equipped to handle clients who have co-occurring disorders. But music is used more as a catalyst to connect and engage with clients and break down barriers. music is not used to treat clients. We don't just put clients in a room for 7 hours a day, play music, let them choose their soundtracks, and call that treatment. Recovery Unplugged is a really clinically oriented program that weaves music throughout every facet of what we do. So we have specialized groups. We do lyrical analysis. We have a group called Open Mic. In the morning, we do pump up or mic check, right? So there's a lot of uniqueness when it comes to seeking treatment at Recovery Unplugged. There are plenty of good treatment centers out there, right? There are plenty of great facilities. The majority are what we talked about offline, which is cookie cutter. Your mornings start out with a goal group, and everybody gets in a circle and everyone sets a goal for themselves for the day. And Bob says, today, I'm going to be honest. Mary says, today, I'm going to be willing. Joe says, today, I'm going to persevere. That's my goal for the day. It's effing boring. You know what I mean? It's a boring experience. When we get people who come into Recovery Unplugged, they're never asking when their discharge date is. But when they find out, they're always asking if they can extend, right? Even that person who didn't want to be there in the first place, myself, right? Like a me. It is just such an incredible experience. And Unplugged has now been open for a little over 9 years. And we have we had a 5-year longitudinal study conducted by Nova Southeastern University, where I happened to have done my internship. And we had interns, that were literally in our office 5 days a week. And we had a 5-year study done, which shows our sober rates are 4 times the national average. We have empirical data that shows that our AMA rates are 5 times less than the average, people who leave against medical advice. National average is somewhere at about 48% of clients who come into treatment, or no, 42%, I think was the stat of clients who come into treatment do not complete. Ours was at 7%. So, we know we're onto something. We know what we're doing is working.
And so you said the word boring, and you said the word engaging. Is there something other than just engaging people and making sure it's not boring? What do you think is the key to the soup, the magic serum here that's helping people stay sober and stay in the program longer and enjoy it more?
I think the camaraderie that occurs within our community through the different types of groups we do. We do a group, and I touched on this before, and I also think attention to detail. So I'm going to let you in on a little secret that we do a Recovery Unplugged, which I guess is not going to be a secret after this.
I was going to say, this is going on a podcast, so be careful.
So, prior to a client coming in, and this goes for any treatment center, any ethical treatment center, we conduct a pre-screening assessment with the client. So we get them on the phone and we get a lengthy history, medical, mental health, substance use, legal, and which every facility should be doing, right? You don't want to have somebody hop on a plane from Illinois to come into treatment in Tennessee or in Florida without knowing who you're bringing in.
Right. And then when they get there, find out it's not appropriate. Right?
Correct. Yeah. Right. So we do this assessment, but towards the end of our assessment, we ask the client what their favorite genre of music is. We ask them who their favorite artist is. And then we ask them what's that one song that touches them the most. And our admissions person who's doing the assessment, jots all that down. And their assessment then gets sent off to our physician. He reviews the assessment to make sure this person's going to meet criteria. They're not medically compromised. He'll recommend a level of care. Okay, Joe, clear to start detox at Recovery Unplugged, or no detox needed. Let's start him at residential level of care, right? So the person, the client books their own flight. We get the itinerary and we send a driver to the airport and we get them from the gate. And as soon as the client sits down in our transport vehicle, that song is playing for them right away. And right away, they say to the driver, "Oh my God, I love this song." And our response is, "We know, you told us," right? And walls come down and rapport is established with our driver right off the bat, right? And that's how the person's treatment experience starts. Then we have this group that we do every Wednesday across the country. It's called Open Mic. Okay. I believe this is the most important group that occurs at Recovery Unplugged. And it is the difference that makes the difference, that really makes their treatment experience different. So every client who comes into our facility is assigned a primary clinician. Caseloads for our clinicians are typically hover between 6 to 7 clients at a time, depending on the census. And every clinician will give an assignment to a client to write on something meaningful to them, okay, based off the client and therapist interactions. Maybe they had childhood sexual trauma or a reoccurring relationship issue or whatever the case is, something deeply personal to that client. And they're challenged to do their assignment and write about it and put it into lyrical verse. Okay. Now, if they don't have a creative bone in their body, they can literally just write their assignment. So the first part of Wednesday at all of Recovery Unplugged across the country, clients are kind of off on their own, scattered throughout the campus, working on their assignment. The second half of Wednesday, all of the clients gather in the main music room where we have a big sound stage and a light system. It's a fully functioning sound stage. You can have a concert there, okay? And one by one, each client gets up on stage to perform their assignment in front of their peers. I'm going to equate this to, we want them to be vulnerable, okay? I remember early on attending NA meetings, and I remember vividly sitting in a meeting once, and a guy raised his hand, and he shared something in front of the group that if it was me, I would have taken to my grave. It was deeply intimate. He got very vulnerable. His emotions, he was crying, and it was heavy duty stuff. Okay. I don't need to get into what he shared, but I was floored. And I'm sitting there, arms closed, legs crossed. I'm still fairly new. I got a couple months clean. I'm sitting in this meeting and I'm rocking like this. And I'm thinking in my head, I could never open up like that. And then the next person raises their hand and they become vulnerable and they share openly. And then the third person raises their hand and they become vulnerable. Guess who the seventh person was to raise their hand?
Dr. Barry.
And I became vulnerable. And if you would have told me 20 minutes before that I would have been doing that, I would have bet my life against it, right? But I got courage from the people who did it before me. It was attractive to me, so I decided to try it. Much the same happens with open mic. You might have Billy who's sitting in the back that's 2 days into treatment that is scared shitless of getting up in front of a group and doing any type of public speaking whatsoever, right? And so he might be the 17th person to go that day. And they're sharing about intimate stuff in there.
Right.
And what happens is, no matter where you come from, how old you are, what your drug of choice was, when you're up on that stage, you're just a human being that's coming into treatment, right? Sick people need to get better. This is not about going from bad to good. It's going from sick to better. And so Billy, who goes up 17th that Wednesday, next Wednesday, he might be 7th. And on the third week, he might be first, grabbing somebody else's hand. But the camaraderie that occurs within the community, everybody becomes like this, which makes the treatment stay even more effective when you have a good community that you're in treatment with. So
Wonderful.
That's another example of, what makes us unique. We have 2 live musical performance groups a week, where Richie from Aerosmith and his band play. On Tuesday, he does a group just with the clients. It's called Super Tuesdays. And then on Fridays, we do at all of our facilities, it's called Feel Good Friday. And it's a concert that happens for the clients before they go back to the residents. People are up, they're dancing around, they're moving. And what's happening is at Feel Good Friday, a lot of the same songs are played, right? Richie has a recovery album called Enemy. And going back to that echoic memory, when a client finally discharges, they have an MP3 player we've given them the day they walked into treatment that's loaded with a bunch of songs. And let's say they're going back to New York and they're about to drive over the Verrazano Bridge, and that's where they used to go cop their drugs, and they're feeling uncomfortable. They put a song on that they heard repeatedly in treatment. It brings them back to a safe place. And music has that power. So
wonderful. Well, as I look at the time, I think, we have to wrap this up, although I'd like to explore several different areas with you, so maybe we'll schedule another interview. But if you just take a moment and think about what's an aspect of what you've already shared that you want to go back and highlight, or something we haven't even asked you about or you haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure you get in this interview.
An aspect I'd like to share about that I'd like to re-highlight is the fact that change is possible for anybody, despite whether or not you want to change. It's all about delayed gratification as opposed to instant. Addiction is feel good now, feel like crap later. Recovery is feel like crap now, feel better later, right? And so the only time people will actually, quote unquote, get this is if they allow themselves enough time where the payoff of being clean and sober outweighs the payoff of going back out to a familiar life of misery disguised as fun, right? So that's one of the things I'd like to highlight. I just think it's important to know that if anybody who's listening to this feels hopeless or is contemplating whether or not they have an issue, here's going to be the deepest statement of the day, okay? People who don't have an issue never contemplate whether or not they have an issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
My mom, who's had, I've seen drunk twice in my entire life, and she's 78 years old. I can guarantee you she's not sitting around today wondering whether or not she's an alcoholic. If you have to think about whether or not you have an issue with something, you probably do. I just think that, anybody is capable of a life beyond their wildest dreams. It's just about putting one foot in front of the other and, trusting that you're doing the next right thing. The hardest part about staying clean is when you don't want to be clean anymore, right? And know that feelings are just temporary. Feelings can't eat you. And, we feel a multitude of things multiple times a day, but feelings aren't facts. Just because you're feeling something right now at that moment doesn't mean that it's a fact.
And of course, when you give people the tools and help them build the internal strength, or some would call it resilience, now they know how to deal with those emotions as just energies that will pass and that they aren't the facts.
I would like to highlight too, if anyone who's listening to this is needing treatment or knows somebody who needs treatment, family member, coworker, I'm always here to help. We are contracted with most of the major insurers across the country. So Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, Humana, Bright Health, Ambetter, Beacon, Magellan, CompPsych, pretty much every United Healthcare, pretty much every insurance company we are a network provider for, which is a cost savings for anybody who is seeking treatment. And I can be reached directly at 754-246-8999. And I'm always available to help. It's what I love to do and will continue doing.
And the website is Recovery Unplugged?
Yep, recoveryunplugged.com.
Well, I'm very grateful. And as I mentioned, I might hit you up for another interview in the not too distant future and explore some other aspects of this work. But I am grateful beyond words. And I look forward to connecting you with a couple people that we've done interviews with in the past 2.5 years and see what the synergy might be there.
Yeah, I'd like that. And, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tim. This has been awesome. I can talk. So if you're looking for another interview, just let me know and I'll continue to babble.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Barry Reiman is the VP of Business Development for Recovery Unplugged Treatment Center. He's also been featured guest on such daytime television shows as Dr. Phil, The Doctors, and Face the Truth with Vivica A. Fox. Working in the field of addiction treatment for close to 2 decades, Dr. Barry has developed an acute understanding and passion for treating those struggling with substance use disorders. Dr. Barry's career in the treatment field stems from his personal connection to addiction. Dr. Barry has been in recovery since June of 1996 and has dedicated his personal and professional life to facilitating change in the lives of those looking for a way out of their addiction. His passion and thirst for knowledge has led him to becoming one of the treatment industry's leading influencers.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.